Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. We're going to go down a little side road here today with Robert Glasscock. Hi, my name is Thomas Miller, by the way, for appropriate introductions. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to this podcast. It's a wealth of information of all things astrology with our teacher, Robert Glasscock. Here's the side road we're going to go down. Let's say that you cast a chart, you're asking a question, and you see something that looks cookbook favorable, for example. In fact, I'll give you a case in point. Let's say that here is a couple, a synastry chart or a relationship chart, and everything looks good from a cookbook interpretation perspective. However, one of the two people has been cheating from the very beginning of the relationship. So the question is, for Robert, can astrology, quote unquote, see that deception? Or does that deception, which is being done off in the side in the shadows, does that cloud that cookbook interpretation? Robert, what do you think?
Well, it's one of the most common questions I think astrologers ever get asked. Is my mate cheating? It's for somebody to even ask an astrologer, is my mate cheating? If you look in their natal chart, the person asking the question, you are very likely to see indications of a cheating mate. Very likely. And yet you will read in Mark Edmund Jones' Horary Astrology. Horary astrology is never any good at predicting another person's actions unless they are directly related to the question. And that's the big key there. What I find is that people that have the potential in their natal charts, I have it, many people, maybe most people do, that have a potential in their birth charts to be deceived in a relationship will tend to only get involved with people who will potentially cheat on them. It's all unconscious. They will only be attracted to those kinds of people so that they experience what it is to have a fear of being cheated on. And that's what shows in the horoscope. I am afraid that my loved one will cheat on me. That's a negative affirmation if you think about it. If it's from past relationships where that's happened, or maybe an example in your parents, one or both of them cheated, it's in the back of your mind that people can cheat even when they swear till death do us part. And it's that unconscious fear of being deceived and cheated on that unconsciously leads to attractions to people who will act out those roles. So the question is not so much whether he or she is cheating on you as why are you suspicious that they are, or you wouldn't have asked this anyway. Nobody asks an astrologer a question like that unless they have a reason to ask it. So they doubt their mate. They went into the marriage doubting their mate. And that's what shows in their horoscope, is doubting the person that you think that you love. So Neptune in the seventh is a classic indication of this. And most astrologers would just read it very cut and dried about, yeah, your mate's cheating on you if it's afflicted. And maybe they are. But the real question is, why is doubt on your part so integral to a marriage? Well, it's because it gives you a way out. It gives you a way out. You who have that configuration are secretly ambivalent about marriage, period. But you can't admit it to yourself, especially not if you have children. But you are the person asking the question, is they've brought a belief system of doubt into the marriage. And either they will behave in ways that trigger that kind of behavior in a mate. Gee, you're always asking me if I'm cheating on you. Well, I guess I will. What have I got to lose? You're going to believe it anyway. They'll produce that kind of, and then they're justified. Oh, he cheated on me. And I had to leave him. Well, if you really look at it honestly, you were waiting for him to cheat. You expected him to cheat, or her. Do you see what I mean? So it becomes a matter of projection. So it's a really interesting area of astrology, this idea of being able to predict other people's behavior. You certainly can look at anybody's chart, a husband or wife or anybody's, and see if they have the potential to cheat. And most of us do have the potential. Now, other certain kinds of signs are really adamantly opposed to cheating, and they won't cheat themselves. And so they will tend to be attracted to other people who, like they, are not cheaters by nature. But cheating is always about escapism, escaping responsibility and escaping obligations. So it's to be an alcoholic is a form of cheating. It's very Neptunian. Then you have an excuse. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. Didn't know what I was saying. I was drunk. Well, who got you drunk? You see, you did. And then the lowering of the inhibitions that alcohol produces let you do what you wanted to do anyway, which is to cheat or whatever it is that you do when you're drunk. So cheating is always about trying to evade obligations and trying to evade Saturn. In other words, commitments, obligations, and so on. If you wanted to do it honestly, you would say, honey, I am really attracted to this woman that I work with, and yeah, I don't know what to do. I don't want to follow through on it, but we just have this incredible connection. And well, can you bring that up to a spouse? Is that okay and comfortable to talk about it? I don't want to do anything, honey, but I want you to know. Well, do you want to do that? So all of this stuff tends to get buried with Neptune aspects, and then it becomes increasingly toxic. And it can absolutely undermine a relationship, which is, of course, one of the things that Neptune in the seventh house can do, is erode the trust. So I don't know if that makes sense, Thomas, either, but that's kind of how I look at this. Is a pretty nuanced question
Yeah,
that you're asking here.
Let's talk about what kinds of charts you could cast for this. Obviously, you could ask a horary question, correct?
Yes.
You could also cast a transit chart to a natal chart. And I was thinking there, which would you cast the transit chart to your natal chart to kind of look at what's going on, or would you cast it to your partners if you were asking the relation? I mean, this could be about anything. This could be about a job. It could be about money. It could be about your kids. There's all kinds of things. But would you I guess you would cast the transit chart to your natal chart if you were asking the question.
Well, to me, it's dependent on the context and the situation of the question. For example, despite what I just said about it's really not advisable to try and read other people's actions from your horoscope. Nonetheless, I have to remind the listeners that several years ago, the mother of one of my Kepler students wrote in the middle of the night. I got her email about her father who had had this massive stroke, was in the hospital. The doctors wanted to take him off. He was in ICU, wanted to take him off food and water for 6 days so they could analyze the brain tissue. She was afraid it would kill him if they did that. Her brother and sister, on the other hand, wanted to go along with the doctors. Could I see anything? And basically, I wrote her back, as I've mentioned, I think before, and told her that he wanted to go. He was ready to go. But of the 3 children, she was the only one who wasn't ready to let him go yet. And he knew this on a soul level. And I recommended some things, but I said, if it were me, I would plan on his going naturally in about 3 days. Very specific from an horary chart, Thomas. And sure enough, her daughter, my student, wrote me back about a week or 2 weeks later and said, well, granddad did die in 3 days after. That's horary. I wouldn't mix it. I would decide what kind of a chart. And in that situation, this woman in her email that night said, oh, I can find his birth certificate if you needed it. But I read the question and thought, this is too urgent. I'm not going to write her back and wait 3 or 5 days for her to find his birth certificate. I don't need it. All I need is an horary chart. But I would never have looked in addition to his natal chart. I didn't need it. I wouldn't look at her natal chart. I didn't need it. So when you begin to look at several charts for one situation, you're pretty much bound to get confused and get contradictory answers. So I would pick one and read it thoroughly and stick with it, because you will be right if you follow that kind of example. Otherwise, you're really risking getting conflicting answers from different kinds of charts and giving an inconclusive or unhelpful answer. But the truth is, what I saw in that horary chart was not so much her father's death as her experiencing her father's death. That's a subtle sounding difference, but that's what that chart showed. She was the querent. She brought the question. This was her horary about her father's death. And there's a very specific place to look for that, namely the 8th house from the 4th house of the father. So that's for starters. And when you do, what you're seeing is this woman is likely to experience the loss of her father in about 3 days. And so sure enough, and that sounds to the lay people like, oh, you predicted he was going to die no, you predicted that she would experience the loss of her father. It could have also been that his condition worsened, which would be the same sort of astrological indication, but it couldn't get much worse. He was already in ICU. So the only thing worse than that would be her experiencing his death.
Let's flip over now. We've been talking about personal questions, and we know we've talked about this before quite a bit. The difference between personal astrology and collective astrology, or mundane astrology, if you will, corporate collective astrology, is that it is harder to steer and shift. You and I can make decision changes in the snap of our fingers and set off in a whole different course. So our charts are a lot more flexible. One of the examples that I was discussing with Robert was, for example, let's say the price of oil in the financial markets, ruled by Neptune. Let's say that it looked favorable. Well, we know financial markets are manipulated, and right now as we are recording this, the price of oil is being held down ahead of the midterm elections. Every trader who has money in the game knows that, right? So it's not any big secret. But here again, the question is, if the chart looks good collectively, say the stock market, and the stock market at that point is being manipulated, will the chart show it?
Yes, it will. For example, when you're dealing with collective things like oil, Saudi Arabia just cut its oil processing to raise the prices of oil. Russia just sabotaged its own pipelines north of Finland in the ocean to raise and to deprive Europe of Russian oil. So these are big collective forces that affect everybody on the planet, because we're still a fossil fuel dependent planet. So politics and these large collective aggregates of factors come into play when you're reading a chart like that. In mundane astrology, you can pretty much use cookbook astrology, because Neptune, for example, absolutely rules undermining and dissolving of things. So, for example, in the United States chart right now, we have transiting Neptune in our 4th house in Pisces, opposite our natal, the United States natal Neptune in the 10th. And we are in an era of the most threatening to democracy of political corruption in United States history, perhaps even surpassing before the Civil War, which was the last time Neptune was in this position. And so what we see being undermined here is the Constitution.
So you can read the cookbook and just interpret from that. So the bottom line is individual astrology, yes, for you, maybe not so much for the other, but with exceptions. And then in the collective, basically you just read the fairly cookbook interpretations and go with that. Good summary?
Yeah, because, as individuals, we have a lot more leeway in how to react to things than a government does, because they're slower moving, for one thing. And governments are in a fishbowl. You and I don't live. We're not covered by the paparazzi. We don't appear in news columns every day. Nobody knows our track record or our history, unlike we do with public figures. So we have a lot more leeway in how to understand our own lives. I just don't have certain people in my life. It's not that I'm nasty to them. I just don't see them.
Yeah.
Or have them around because to me they're a waste of time or they're actually toxic.
Yeah.
And that's okay. There are toxic people out there, but as long as you're not sleeping with them, you're not toxic.
Thank you for this. This is interesting. And I wanted to put into context that this is somebody who is approaching, I don't know, you guys keep piling on the readings. He is approaching having done in his lifetime, since he first picked up an astrology book at age 20, nearly 60,000 readings. So in that context, when you hear something like that, that's the depth and the well of experience that we're drawing from. Everything that you need to accompany this episode is in the show notes, and we also put any downloadables always toward the top, and that's kind of a standing thing. Also, you can find our YouTube channel, information, link, and now on YouTube we have playlists that have been created of all the old soul, new soul astrology podcasts, and the eclipse episodes are broken out as well. That's all under the Fun Astrology YouTube channel. We just kept it all in one place, but it's broken out so that you can get all the old soul, new souls together in one place on the playlist. Thank you so much for listening. Hope this question helps. It's very relevant when you're looking at something. How far can you take it? We'll see you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock.